I want to start with the banks because, I was noting for posterity here, you left BMO just before the credit crisis hit. So you must have watched pretty closely and were still pretty closely involved with what that bank went through, as they all did in the aftermath of that crisis. It's a very different crisis today, but I wanted to start with your lens on how they're managing through this one.
I think ceteris paribus, Amanda. I think they're doing as well as can be expected. And in fact, I've been actually pleased to see the way the banks have responded in terms of giving, for example, mortgage deferrals and trying to be responsive to the needs of our customers in this kind of really trying times. And so they're doing lots of things that you would expect and some things that they're not. And I think it's generally to their credit that they're responding in kind to the needs of customers. Yeah.
And we do have this feeling, Tony, that the worst is still to come, in the sense that there may be, we talk often to restaurateurs and the like who say they're hanging on, but that they may not make it and that a big number of them may not make it. Do we have this sense that there's a wave of bankruptcies ahead? Are you worried about the Canadian economy in the months ahead?
Yeah, well, the honest answer is, Amanda, we don't really know. This is an unusual circumstance, one that we've not really experienced before. And I think is going to require what I would characterize as a contingent response. In other words, we're going to have to respond in kind to events as they unfold. And a lot of it we just can't predict. We just don't know which turn it's going to take. I mean, we're going through a little bit of a roller coaster experience, if I can characterize it that way, in which the minute we get kind of a little bit of a good news on the front of the managing the pandemic and how it's performing and how we're performing and dealing with it, then we get a little bit of an uptick, and then it kind of settles back a little bit. So we're going to have to just wait and see. And as I said, I think the best approach is what I would characterize as a contingent response. We'll face circumstances as they arise, both for the banks and importantly, most importantly, for our customers as their needs arise. So I think you're going to see new and interesting supportive ways of helping customers as they deal with all the challenges they're faced.
Give me your rating on how the government has managed through this pandemic. I mean, they got a lot of credit for moving fast and creatively in the early going of something that nobody could have anticipated. Well, nobody but Bill Gates. But just in terms of how we responded, how do you rate the overall track record here?
Well, of course, I'm not the scorekeeper necessarily, but I think they've done a pretty good job. I mean, we've kept interest rates, which is a key ingredient in this, very, very low. And that's enabled a lot of funding to be in place and continue to be in place that otherwise might not be. So that's one big, very important policy variable that they've really held the line on. And I think that's very good, both in Canada and the United States, I might add. And so they're taking, I would characterize as that contingent response approach, which is they're looking at events as they're unfolding. They're looking at the needs. What's happening, what's the kind of impact on smaller businesses in particular are the ones that are being particularly badly hit at this point in the cycle. And I think they're responding appropriately. Is there more to be done? Of course there is. And as I said, I think you'll see the government responding as new needs arise.
One of the outcomes of the great credit crisis was Dodd-Frank and tightening of the regulations around U.S. banks. Canada's banks, of course, very different in how they're regulated and how they were managed. So we obviously, most Canadians, very aware and proud that our financial system was very different. We've seen gradual loosening and weakening of those rules that were brought in after the credit crisis. And some would argue that it's in some ways exposed that system to risk again. Do you agree with that view, and do you worry about it if so? That
gets into a little bit of a technical argument in terms of what is the loosening and what happens and things of that nature. And to be honest with you, Amanda, I'm not sufficiently close to it. And it's like everything else with regulations, when they're imposed and when they're loosened, there really is a tail and a little bit lag effect. So I think it's very, very early to kind of come down on whether it's good or whether it's bad and what the impact might be.
Meanwhile, we definitely have seen our own system continue to trade pretty strongly. Canada's banks have done very well in recent years. Do you worry about, if you were running one of the banks today, if you were back at BMO as CEO, are the next few years going to be bumpy ones, do you think?
Yeah, they are, but they have been in the past. And I'm not trying to be a pangloss on this, but But the banks, as I said, they respond in due course to events as they occur. And our Canadian banks are very strong, they're very conservative, they're very well managed, and there are a few of them, and some can be critical of that, but in fact, it allows kind of a coordinated national response between the government and the banks, who remain very close to each other in terms of thinking about what has to be done and what's in the most interest of Canadians on an ongoing basis. So the Canadian banks have been and will continue to be quickly and very responsive on a very quick basis. Yeah.
One thing that seems clear is that this is going to be an uneven recession, and that the pain, even of the pandemic, has been uneven, right? Some jobs are safe, and therefore people are actually saving money right now. Other jobs are very vulnerable and people are at great risk. Should we be concerned with the inequity that we already knew was in our system being exacerbated through all of this?
I wouldn't be inordinately excited about it. But again, as I said, we're going to have to wait and see how it unfolds. And I think we're going to have to respond as events occur. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but I keep responding that I think the contingent response is the one that we should be prepared for. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You founded this organization FAST a long time ago, I want to say 2004, 2005, but you're kind of revamping it now. So tell me, it's Fighting Anti-Semitism Together. I've got it now, Tony. First of all, why were you moved to found it, and what are you changing about it now? What's new about what's happening now?
Well, of course, as you know, Amanda, perhaps the lion's share of the credit really goes to my wife, my dearly beloved Liz, who back in the early days when she was confronted with an outbreak of pretty awful anti-Semitic incidents, both in Toronto and in Montreal. And, you know, she kind of confronted me. There's a little story in there, but I won't go into that. It's a little bit humorous. But she confronted me and said we had to do something about it. And Liz was a teacher, and she strongly believed that the way to deal with a lot of these kind of issues, which are kind of ingrained, is through education. And after a lot of thinking and planning, we landed on an educational initiative. And by the way, the FAST organization, an important feature for me was this was a coalition of non-Jewish business leaders. I kind of put the arm on my closest friends in business and the community, all non-Jews, to combat this, because I felt it was particularly important to send a signal that this issue of anti-Semitism is not a Jewish issue, and it's not an issue for Jews to solve. It's an issue for non-Jews to solve, which has been the premise that I've been working with forever. And so we started that initiative. I thought, frankly, that it might blow over after 18 months or so, because Canada's somewhat like that. Sadly, as we have seen on both an international basis and locally as well, the need to fight it has not gone away. In fact, it's gotten worse, if anything.
Right.
And so our program was developed to help educate younger kids in grades 6, 7, and 8 about the evils of intolerance, but a specific manifestation is anti-Semitism, which is the oldest hatred, and to equip the young kids with an alternative narrative so that when they're confronted with aspects of anti-Semitism or any other aspects of intolerance, they're able to say, well, you know what, I heard something quite different when I was in school today, and that's different, Mom and Dad, than what I might have been hearing elsewhere, and let me tell you about it. And that now has also gone into a program for more senior kids in high schools. Same program, it's now online. The resource is available free for teachers, and it's become, it has had a significant uptake. One of our big challenges, of course, was to get the program to be coordinated with all of the boards of education in all the provinces, French and English, and only have one version of it. That was quite a feat. I won't go into it in detail, but it was quite a feat. At any rate, that program has now been delivered to more than 4.4 million young Canadians in over 22,000 schools across the country, and has in fact also been taken up by the Department of Correctional Services for their use. And so it goes from strength to strength and continues to grow in its need. And of course, I now start to think about looking to the future and what's going to sustain this on an ongoing basis. And I looked for an organization that was similarly focused in terms of fighting anti-Semitism, and lo and behold, the Canadian Institute for Studies in Anti-Semitism, under the brilliant leadership of Catherine Chatterley, a University of Chicago-based historian of European studies in Winnipeg, who founded her institute, and they publish peer-reviewed articles, which are available worldwide, on anti-Semitism.